I call it my worst nightmare, but it was real. I'm Sarah Jenkins, and I'm 29 years old. 3 days ago, at my own engagement party, the woman who was supposed to become my mother-in-law looked me dead in the eye and said, "My son deserves a partner who understands family heritage, not a girl whose mother pours coffee and wipes tables for a living in a cheap diner." She said that right in front of 80 guests. My fiancé just froze. When his mother told him to sit down, he did exactly what he was told. I took off my necklace, placed it on the table, and walked out. What they didn't know was that for months, I had been keeping a massive secret entrusted to me by his grandfather on his deathbed. They didn't know I had discovered the absolute rot behind this supposedly perfect family. When I step into that boardroom next week, everything Victoria Vance thinks she controls is going to fall apart completely. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where it all started. The engagement party was held at a century-old yacht club in Newport, Rhode Island. It's the kind of exclusive territory New England old money uses to remind outsiders that they don't belong. In a place like that, the crystal chandeliers overhead cost more than most people's cars, and even the quiet in the air smells like wealth. 80 guests, all dressed in what I later learned to recognize as quiet luxury, the kind of wealth that whispers instead of shouts. I was sitting at the main table wedged between Julian and one of his great-aunts whose relation I couldn't quite place. In the center of the table were fresh white hydrangeas, costing $450 a pot according to a bill I accidentally glimpsed. Every single menu at the seats was printed with the vintage Vance family crest. I learned early on that in a family like this, even having a meal requires a pedigree. Victoria Vance sat at the head of the table. She's Julian's mother, my future mother-in-law. This is a woman who can disguise sheer malice as benevolence and wrap condescension as a gift, all while maintaining a smile that says, "I am doing you a favor." She stood up, preparing to give what I thought would be a welcoming toast. The way she held her champagne glass looked like a professional holding a tool they knew exactly how to use. Her smile never reached her eyes. "Tonight, we are absolutely thrilled to welcome everyone," she began. It sounded polite enough. I felt Julian's hand grip mine under the table. Julian has always had such a generous heart. The shift happened in a single pause. You know that feeling when the temperature in a room suddenly plummets? You can tell someone is about to say something that completely changes the atmosphere. "But I must be entirely honest," Victoria continued, her voice not rising at all. "That's the thing about real power. It doesn't need to shout. My son deserves a partner who understands family heritage, not a girl who's, shall we say, a girl whose mother spent most of her life pouring coffee and wiping tables for the kind of people sitting in this room." The sound of silver utensils being put down echoed, 1, 2, 5, 10 times. Throughout the entire hall, guests froze mid-chew, mid-sip, mid-breath. One of Mrs. Vance's elderly friends let out a distinct gasp that I could hear from 3 seats away. Julian's cousin Leo, the one marginalized by the family for marrying his same-sex partner, was about to stand up, but his husband grabbed his arm. I felt Julian's hand twitch, as if he wanted to hold tighter, and then he pulled away. 80 people. Dead silence. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning and the vibration of a phone 2 tables over. My heart was pounding in my ears. But my hands, to my own surprise, were completely steady. I looked at Julian, not Victoria. "Julian," I waited. "Mom," he started, his voice soft, almost a whisper. "This isn't the time." "Sit down, Julian," Victoria interrupted, her voice a bit louder. "The adults are speaking." I watched him. I watched that exact moment happen in his eyes. The calculation, the weighing of options, and the utter cowardice. His chair made a slight scraping sound against the floor as he shifted his weight, but he did not stand up. That sound, that tiny scrape of wood, is what I will remember forever. Not her words, not the dead silence, but the sound of him choosing to stay in his seat. My fingers moved to my collarbone. The white gold clasp, the heirloom sapphire necklace estimated at $55,000. Julian had been so proud when his grandfather handed it to him for the proposal. "He chose you," Julian had said. "He's never given this to anyone. Arthur Vance did choose me, just not in the way Julian thought." I slowly and decisively unclasped the necklace. I wanted everyone to see. I wanted Victoria to see. I laid it on the table, the sapphire hitting the bone china with a sharp click. It was the only sound in a room where 80 people were holding their breath. I stood up. I looked at Victoria, completely ignoring Julian. "Mrs. Vance," I said, my voice calmer than I ever expected. "My mother showed more dignity serving tables than you have shown in your entire life." Then I walked out. It was 52 steps from the main table to the exit. I counted them silently to keep myself from breaking down, to keep my back straight, and to keep my hands from shaking. The valet handed me my keys to a 2018 Subaru Forester. Julian had offered to buy me a nicer car, but I had refused. Now I understood why. Somewhere deep down, I always knew I might need my own escape route. Before I even reached the parking lot, my phone began vibrating frantically. By the time I drove back to my Boston apartment, I had 19 missed calls. I didn't answer a single one. As I pulled out of the yacht club, I saw Julian in the rearview mirror. He had run out and was just standing there watching my car disappear. He didn't chase after me. He never chased after me. I got back to my apartment in Somerville just past 10, a one-bedroom place, $1,400 a month. Not glamorous, but it was mine. Paid for with my own salary from the Coastal Conservation Trust, not his family's money. I didn't cry. That surprised me too. I thought I would cry. Thought I would fall apart. Instead, I made myself a cup of chamomile tea. The water was scalding hot, just the way my mother used to make it when times were tough. I sat at the kitchen table and pulled a manila envelope from the fireproof safe in my bedroom, one I had kept for 2 months. The label read, Vance Coastal Trust Evidence. 400 pages of records, bank statements, forged ecological assessment invoices, board minutes where Victoria voted down critical wetland protection projects, while later claiming they didn't meet criteria, emails, and spreadsheets. It was a paper trail of corruption left by a woman who thought she was untouchable. I had been preparing for this moment, not hoping for it, but always ready. On my desk sat a photograph of Arthur Vance. It was taken 2 years ago at a conservation fundraiser when I was just a grateful scholarship recipient, and he was just a kind old man who remembered my college thesis. That was before he asked me to do what I did, before I understood exactly why he chose me. I stared at that photo for a long time. Then my phone rang. The caller ID showed Leo Vance. I answered, "Leo!" "Sarah." His voice was tense, panicked. I could hear his heavy breathing. "Are you okay? I was about to drive over to your place, but Uncle Richard said I should call first." "I'm fine." "That was definitely not fine. That was—" He paused. "I'm so sorry. I should have said something. I should have stood up." "You tried," I said. "I saw it. It just wasn't enough." He fell silent. I heard an engine in the background. He was calling from his car. "Sarah, listen. There's something you need to know. After you left, Victoria called an emergency board meeting. Tomorrow morning at 9. She plans to remove you from the trust's board." I expected that. Part of my plan was built entirely on this expectation. "On what grounds?" "She's claiming Arthur wasn't of sound mind when he appointed you. She's saying you manipulated a dying man with ALS and—" He hesitated. "She's also filing for a restraining order tomorrow. She's going to accuse you of using Julian just to gain control of the trust." The time on my phone read 11:47 p.m. "Leo," I said, "when did Arthur pass away?" A pause, a confused silence. "August 12th. Why?" "Arthur appointed me as trustee on May 10th, 3 months before he passed." My voice was steady, stating cold facts. He was completely lucid. Attorney Marcus Thorne witnessed it. His attending neurologist and a psychologist hired specifically to document his mental capacity witnessed it too, precisely to protect against a situation like today. I heard Leo draw in a sharp breath. "Your aunt can't remove me, Leo. The bylaws state a trustee cannot be removed without just cause and a unanimous vote. Furthermore, I have something in my possession that Victoria has no idea exists." "What's that?" "Her father-in-law's final words," I said, "written down and signed, and there's a video recording." "Sarah, what are you going to do?" I looked at the folder on my desk, looked at Arthur's photograph, and looked at the evidence of everything Victoria had tried to compromise. "I'm going to finish what Arthur asked me to do." After hanging up, I didn't sleep. I sat at my laptop and drafted an email. The timestamp later showed it was sent on November 12th, 2025, at 12:45 a.m. Subject, Emergency Board Meeting, regarding the Vance Coastal Trust. Breach of fiduciary duty and financial irregularities. Body. Pursuant to Article 7, Section 4 of the Vance Coastal Trust Bylaws, I hereby call an emergency meeting of the Board of Directors to address critical issues concerning breaches of fiduciary duty and financial irregularities. Time: November 15th, 2025, at 10 a.m. Location: Offices of the Azure Coast Conservation Association, 410 Congress Street, Boston. Attendance is mandatory for all members in accordance with Article 7, Section 6. The evidence package is attached. Sarah Jenkins, Trustee. 72 hours notice. Exactly as required by the bylaws. Clean, legal, and completely bulletproof. I CC'd all 13 board members. I CC'd Marcus Thorne, the family's longtime legal counsel. I CC'd Special Agent David Chen from the Criminal Investigation Division of the EPA. I CC'd Emily Rose from the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Massachusetts. And finally, I CC'd Thomas Keegan, an investigative reporter for the Boston Globe. The attachment was 48.5 megabytes, exactly 400 pages of evidence. I hit send at 12:45 a.m. The printer buzzed to life and began humming. 25 hard copies, one for every person who was about to step into that room. My coffee maker was programmed to start brewing at 5:30 a.m. I finally collapsed into bed around 3 in the morning. My phone vibrated again. It was a text from Julian. "Sarah, please, I am so sorry. Can we talk?" I read it. I didn't reply. I deleted it. Some conversations simply don't deserve to happen. Let me tell you how I got to this point. How a girl whose mother served tables in a tiny town ended up holding the kind of leverage that could dismantle one of the oldest old money dynasties in New England. It all started with a letter back in May 2015. I was 18 and just about to graduate high school. My father had passed away 2 years prior in an accident involving a mining truck, leaving behind absolutely no life insurance. My mother was working 3 jobs, one of which was at a diner called Rosie's in Scranton. She poured coffee and wiped down greasy tables for people who never even bothered to look her in the eye. The letter bore the letterhead of the Vance Coastal Trust, featuring a simple, hopeful logo of a lighthouse and a seagull. "Congratulations, you have been selected for the Vance Environmental Scholars Program. Full tuition for 4 years, plus $35,000 annually, fully funded by the Vance Coastal Trust." I had been accepted to Cornell University just 2 weeks earlier, but I was planning on deferring. There was no money. There was never any money. When I read that letter out loud to my mother, she broke down. She held the paper in hands that were red and raw from heavy-duty dish soap, crying harder than I had ever seen. "This is wonderful, Sarah," she sobbed. "Your dad would be so proud." At 18, I had no idea that the man who signed that scholarship check would one day hand me the exact leverage to unravel his daughter-in-law's life. I didn't even know who Arthur Vance was back then. Not yet. I met him for the first time in October 2023. By then, I had graduated from Cornell and returned to the East Coast to take over as executive director of the Azure Coast Conservation Association, the very program that had launched my career 8 years ago. We were at an annual environmental gala hosted at the Copley Square Hotel in Boston. I was participating in a panel called The New Generation of Conservation. It was the standard routine: share your story, inspire the donors, and make them feel like their tax-deductible contributions were genuinely making a difference. After the panel wrapped up, an elderly man in a wheelchair rolled over to me. He was 85 years old with incredibly sharp eyes, wearing a handwritten name tag that read, A. Vance, founder, Arthur Vance. "You're the 2015 scholar, aren't you?" he asked. His voice was slightly slurred but still carried immense authority. "I remember your application essay. You wrote about your father's hands being stained with coal dust." I was stunned that he actually remembered. After hundreds of scholars over several decades, he remembered mine. "Yes, sir. He was a heavy machinery mechanic." He smiled. It wasn't the polite plastic smile I had learned to spot in corporate networking. It was a real, genuine smile. "Would you join me for coffee next week?" he asked. "There are some things I'd like to discuss with you." I said, "Of course. You don't say no to the person who paid for your Ivy League education." I had absolutely no idea what he was about to ask of me. On October 20th, 2023, we met at a quiet little cafe right next to the Boston Public Library. It wasn't the kind of high-end place where Boston's elite usually gather. Arthur had specifically requested a spot where I would feel comfortable. He ordered black coffee, no sugar, exactly like me. He was dying. He told me that within the first 5 minutes. ALS, advanced stage, with only 6 to 12 months left to live. His children and grandchildren didn't know yet. He wanted to talk about the trust and about legacy. Then, he smoothly steered the conversation toward Victoria, asking a few probing questions. My daughter-in-law handles most of the operational logistics for the trust these days. Do you interact with her often? I kept my answer guarded and diplomatic. We've submitted several wetland protection proposals. The review process is very rigorous. Arthur shot me a sharp, knowing look. A very diplomatic answer. When he reached for his coffee cup, his hand trembled violently. I noticed it, and he noticed that I noticed. I don't have much time, he said, so I'll be direct. I need to know if you are as brave as you sounded in that essay years ago. I didn't know how to answer that, so I stayed quiet. He leaned forward. Because I need someone brave, and I think it might be you. That was the beginning. The real conversation took place 5 months later, on March 15, 2025, inside Arthur's private study at the Vance estate in Beacon Hill. It's the kind of house that makes you feel incredibly small just by existing inside it. Every floorboard breathed history, and every portrait on the wall spoke of deep-rooted heritage. Arthur was much sicker by then. He had lost a good 30 pounds, and speaking had become an immense struggle. Before I sat down, he dismissed his nurse. His desk was massive mahogany, older than both of our ages combined. The walls were covered with photos of conservation areas and scholars from past decades. My own photo from the 2015 gala was right there in the third row, next to a girl who went on to become a marine biologist. Arthur slid a manila folder toward me. I've known that Victoria has been misappropriating funds for 18 months now, he said with great effort. No small talk, no pleasantries. I hired a private investigator. This is a copy of all the evidence. I opened the folder. Bank statements, wire transfers, shell company registrations. The figures made my head spin. Mr. Vance, this is nearly $6,528,000 to be exact, Arthur corrected. That money was designated to protect the coastal wetlands of Cape Cod and to compensate the local fishermen who were displaced. I looked up at him. He was crying. Silent tears, the kind that fall when you're simply too exhausted to actually sob. Why haven't you gone to the authorities? I asked. Because I am a coward, he said simply, as if stating a plain fact. I couldn't bear to watch a scandal destroy everything my father and I built. The trust has done so much good. If I expose Victoria publicly, donors will run, the board will panic, and the tens of thousands of acres we protect will be auctioned off. Everything will collapse. Then what do you want me to do? He painstakingly pulled out another, thinner folder. Inside were 6 notarized affidavits and a flash drive containing video files. Next month, I am appointing you as a trustee. Victoria will receive notice, but she will dismiss it as the sentimentality of a dying old man. What she doesn't know is that I've given you veto power over any fund allocations exceeding $500,000. She also has no idea these affidavits and videos exist. What are these? A record, Arthur said. I confronted Victoria multiple times about where the money was going and about how she used conservation funds to clear the path for her luxury resort project. I got her to admit to it. Since writing is difficult for me, I recorded it on video and had my attorney take official statements and notarize them. Psychiatrists witnessed it to confirm I was entirely lucid. When I pass, this goes to you. He looked at me, locking his eyes onto mine. I am dying, Sarah. I am too weak to fight her. But you are not weak. You never have been. Will you finish what I cannot? I thought about my father's coal-stained hands, my mother's skin cracked from the freezing cold, and the 18-year-old version of me opening that life-altering scholarship letter. If I do this, I said slowly, I will lose Julian. He used what little strength he had left to grip my wrist. If you don't do this, that wetland will be paved over, and dozens of families who rely on the ocean will lose their future. Which matters more? I knew the answer. I think I had always known. I'll do it. Arthur passed away on August 12, 2025. The funeral was private, strictly for family. I wasn't invited, but I attended the public memorial service held 4 days later at Trinity Church in Boston. Over 400 people showed up, surrounded by white calla lilies, Arthur's absolute favorite. The floral arrangements alone must have cost $20,000. Victoria delivered the eulogy, wearing a $9,000 black Dior suit. I knew the price because I had learned to recognize those things by then. I had learned to see right through wealth like looking at a ghost, judging it by the space it occupied and the air it displaced. My father-in-law dedicated his life to this land and to vulnerable communities, Victoria said. Beautiful, completely hollow words. His legacy will endure through this foundation. I sat in the very last row, holding that manila folder inside my bag. Yes, I thought, his legacy will endure. Just not in the way you think. After the service, Marcus Thorne walked over to me. He was Arthur's attorney, 68 years old, and had served the family for 3 decades. He handed me a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten note in Arthur's shaky script, dated July 10th, a month before his passing. Finish what I couldn't. I trust you. A V. I carefully folded it and placed it in my wallet. I've carried it with me every single day since. Let me explain how I conducted the investigation. Because even before Arthur formally recruited me, I had already started digging deeply on my own. In January 2025, 2 months before that pivotal conversation in Arthur's study, the New England Ecological Watchdog Organization received an anonymous email. It was a nonprofit oversight group I had co-founded under an alias back in 2021 to investigate fraud among East Coast environmental NGOs. The email had arrived at 3:47 a.m. from an untraceable temporary address. Investigate Vance Coastal Trust land acquisitions denied between 2020 and 2024. Clear evidence of kickbacks and financial irregularities. Focus on Cape Cod South Shore projects. Cross-reference the shrinkage of protected acreage against the timeline of real estate developments owned by Victoria. The ledger doesn't balance. I read it 3 times. That was the moment I realized someone was asking me to investigate the very foundation that had paid for my college education. The foundation run by the family of the man I loved. I called my co-founder immediately. I need to recuse myself from this investigation. Not unless you're the only person who can access the core data, she replied. Can you? I could. As executive director of the Azure Coast Conservation Association, I had access to all of the Vance Foundation's public tax filings. I had existing relationships with other NGOs that had applied for grants. I could gather the data without raising a single eyebrow. I logged every step, every decision, the recusal protocols, and the legal reviews, because I knew that if I found anything, if this was true, I had to be absolutely bulletproof. It took me 3 weeks to find the pattern. It was all right there in IRS Form 99. Oh, the public records. I downloaded 5 years of statements. Total foundation assets. $280 million. Reported annual conservation spending, averaging $7 million. But here was the discrepancy. Over those 5 years, 14 vital wetland protection projects had been denied for no discernible reason. Meanwhile, administrative and outside consulting fees had skyrocketed from 9% to 26%. Where was the extra money going? I found the answer in Schedule O of Form 990. Consulting fees paid to 5 specific corporations, totaling $6,528,000 over 5 years. The entities were Crestline Coastal Solutions, Horizon Advisory Group, Beacon Strategic Partners, New England Land Management LLC, and Seabreeze Ecology. I ran searches on all 5. Every single one was registered in Wyoming, a well-known haven for anonymous shell companies. They shared the exact same registered agent, had no websites, and listed 0 employees on LinkedIn. Every single payment had been authorized by the foundation president, V. Vance. Next, I traced the bank accounts. It took a bit of maneuver, utilizing subpoenas requested through our oversight group's legal counsel. It's an investigative authority nonprofits possess when there is a reasonable suspicion of fraud. The funds from all 5 shell companies ultimately flowed into a single account. The account holder, Victoria M. Vance. A personal checking account, Bank of America. But the definitive proof wasn't just the money, it was the victims. I personally visited the south shore of Cape Cod. I met Captain Elias in a weathered little harbor tavern. He was 60 years old and had fished those waters for generations. Because the foundation had suddenly pulled its funding and failed to buy the buffer zone, the town council had sold the land to a commercial developer instead. The water quality deteriorated, and the local fisheries were ruined. They told us the trust was focusing on different ecological demographics this year, he said, drawing from his pipe with eyes that had seen too much. Now I'm forcing myself to sell my boat and run sightseeing tours for the very luxury resorts they built over our water. After that interview, I sat in my car for 20 minutes. Victoria hadn't just stolen money. She had stolen people's livelihoods and their dignity. Arthur's video and affidavits filled in the remaining blanks. I reviewed those documents after his passing. Marcus, the attorney, hand-delivered them to me in late August 2025. 6 affidavits, each stamped by a notary public, each witnessed and signed by a psychiatrist and Marcus himself. Affidavit number 3, dated April 8th, was the most devastating. In the video, Arthur sat in his wheelchair, his ventilator letting out a soft, rhythmic hiss. Off camera, Victoria's voice sounded cold and arrogant. "I confronted Victoria today with the bank statements and the shell companies," Arthur said slowly to the camera. Pow, she did not deny it. The video then cut to an audio recording from that confrontation. "What are you going to do, Arthur?" Victoria's voice echoed. "Go to the board? They'll just assume your illness has affected your mind. Call the police? Then get ready to watch the reputation of the trust your father built turn to absolute ash." The recording captured her chilling laugh. "You're dying anyway, a helpless invalid. This place will be entirely mine soon enough." On August 25, 2025, a week after Arthur's funeral, I sat alone in my apartment and cried for the first time since everything began. Arthur had carried all of that entirely on his own. Day after day, watching his daughter-in-law use money meant to protect the land to clear paths for resorts, yet completely powerless to stop it out of fear of destroying his father's life's work. He was so incredibly brave, yet so profoundly alone. I carefully secured the flash drive. "I won't let you down," I whispered to the empty room. By September 2025, I had compiled everything I needed. A complete, unassailable chain of evidence establishing violations of federal environmental laws, wire fraud, and tax evasion. But I still had a problem. I was already engaged to Julian Vance. We had been dating since August 2023. He proposed in October 2024. The wedding was set for November 30th, 2025. I loved him. That was the core of my dilemma. I loved him, and I was about to dismantle his family. That autumn, I kept a private, hidden journal to untangle my moral calculations. September 14th. Julian proposed because he loves the version of me he thinks he knows. Kind, forgiving, understanding. If I do this, he will see the real me. Someone who chooses justice over comfort. Will he still love that person? Do I even care anymore? At least a dozen times that fall, I tried to tell him. A dozen times the words were right on the tip of my tongue. Your mother is stealing money and destroying wetlands. But every single time I swallowed them back down. Because once I said it, there was no going back. And I needed to be certain of one thing first. I needed to know if, when pushed to the edge, Julian would choose what was right over what was easy. So I devised a plan. The engagement party would be my test. If Victoria attacked me, and I knew she would eventually, and Julian publicly stood up for me, protected me, and chose me, I would tell him everything. We would face it together and save the foundation as partners. But if he didn't stand up, if he sat down at his mother's command, then I would have my answer. I have to tell you how we met because that matters too. August 19th, 2023. A volunteer beach cleanup in Boston's Seaport District. Work had been incredibly stressful that week, and I went out to clear my head by picking up trash. Julian was working alone, completely separate from his family. He wore ordinary outdoor gear, no brand names, and showed absolutely no signs of wealth. We bumped into each other while emptying our trash bags. We both laughed and struck up a conversation. "I'm Cole," he said. That was his middle name, as I later found out. "What do you do?" I asked. "Marine biologist. I analyze water samples at a rundown institute. Boring, I know." "That's not boring," I said, and I meant it. "That's incredibly important." He smiled as if I had just handed him something precious. "You're the very first person to say that." We exchanged numbers. Our first date was 4 days later. Just coffee, at the exact same cafe Arthur would later choose. For a solid 6 months, I had absolutely no idea he was a Vance. He drove a battered Tacoma pickup he paid for with his own loan, and he refused to use any trust money. He was kind and attentive. When I talked about the Azure Coast and the displaced fishermen, he listened with genuine empathy. I fell for him because he seemed completely different from the wealthy donors I usually had to manage at work. He felt real, February 2024, 6 months into dating. He invited me to meet his parents. We pulled up outside a townhouse in Beacon Hill, a historic 1880s brick home valued at $12 million. My heart sank. I recognized the address instantly. It was printed on every single letterhead of the Vance Coastal Trust. "Cole," I said slowly, "what exactly is your last name?" He looked confused. "Vance, Julian Cole, Vance. I thought you knew. Your family's foundation funded my entire college education." His eyes lit up with excitement. "That's amazing. It's absolute destiny." I forced a smile. "Yeah, destiny." But inside I was panicking because I had just fallen in love with the heir to a massive environmental empire, and at the time, I didn't know his mother was a thief. Our first family dinner was in February 2024. Just 4 people in a formal dining room built for 12. Me, Julian, Victoria, and Julian's uncle, Richard. Victoria was polite. That icy, razor-sharp brand of polite. It felt entirely like an interview. "College on an environmental scholarship?" she said with a thin smile. "How resourceful." "Julian, darling, you never mentioned Sarah came from such humble beginnings." Julian missed the malice entirely. "Mom, she went to Cornell. It's incredible." "Of course," Victoria said. "We always love an inspiring story of charity transforming a life." On the drive home that night, Julian said, "I think tonight went incredibly well." I replied, "Of course." But I knew better. I knew Victoria had already decided I wasn't good enough for her son. I just didn't know how far she would go to prove it. Julian proposed in October 2024, on a quiet, secluded beach in Cape Cod. A simple proposal that belonged entirely to him, not his family. He hadn't bought a ring. Instead, he used the sapphire necklace Arthur had given his grandmother. He had asked for Arthur's blessing just before the old man became too ill. "I don't care about my family's money or their reputation," he told me. "I care about you. Will you marry me?" I said yes because I loved him, because I didn't know yet what his mother had done. The very next day, Victoria called. "Bring Sarah over for lunch. We need to handle the wedding arrangements." That lunch was the beginning of the end. From January to November 2025, I lived a double life. I discovered the fraud in January. Arthur recruited me in March. He passed away in August. By September, I had every piece of evidence locked away. And running parallel to all of it was the wedding planning. 8 separate meetings. Venue, catering, florals, photography, the band, the invitations. Every single detail was micromanaged by Victoria. Every choice I made was systematically vetoed. She chose the engagement party venue herself, the Newport Yacht Club, running up a total bill of $85,000. I spent my days smiling through cake tastings and my nights logging the paper trail of her embezzlement. On November 5th, just a week before the engagement party, Victoria called me directly for the first time. "I need to speak with you privately. Let's do coffee tomorrow." We met at an incredibly expensive, high-end French bistro in Beacon Hill. She didn't waste a single moment. "I will offer you $300,000 to walk away from this engagement neatly," she said, her tone as casual as if she were pricing a car. "You can buy your mother a proper house. Start fresh. Julian will be heartbroken, but he will recover. This is more than you would make in a decade at that tiny little non-profit of yours." I didn't have any debt. I lived frugally, saving every penny I earned. "I am not leaving Julian," I said. The thin smile completely vanished from her face. "Then you will regret staying." I stood up. The entire conversation had taken exactly 11 minutes. "I'll see you at the engagement party, Mrs. Vance." For me, it was a promise. She heard it as a threat. She wasn't wrong. The night of the engagement party, after I walked out, after I drove home, and after Leo called to warn me, I sat down and did exactly what I had been preparing to do for months. I sent that email at 12:45 a.m. subject line. Emergency board meeting regarding the Vance Coastal Trust. 72 hours notice. The meeting was set for November 15th at 10 a.m. On my turf, not hers. I CC'd every single key player. The board members, Marcus the attorney, the EPA agents, the federal prosecutor, and the media. I attached 48.5 megabytes of pure leverage. The read receipts started trickling in over the next few hours. Marcus Thorne read at 1:14 a.m. Dr. Helen, a board member, read at 6:47 a.m. Victoria Vance read at 7:02 a.m. I pictured the look on her face when she opened that email, when she saw the recipient list, when she saw the sheer size of the attachment, and when she realized I wasn't the easy target she thought I was. Victoria tried to fight back. November 12th, 9 a.m. She tried to convene her own emergency board meeting, the one she had scheduled just before my email went out. Only 4 board members loyal to her showed up. Marcus attended as well, but he wasn't representing Victoria. He was there representing the estate of Arthur Vance. "Mrs. Vance," he said, his tone calm and legally precise, "I have certifications from 3 separate medical experts confirming Arthur possessed full mental capacity on the day he appointed Miss Jenkins. I also possess written directives from Arthur stating that Miss Jenkins cannot be removed without a unanimous vote or proven legal cause. You have neither." Victoria's face went pale, then flushed a deep crimson. "I want that girl off this board immediately." "You don't have the authority," Marcus replied. The meeting lasted exactly 14 minutes. He completely shut down her attempt. Victoria's next move: legal action. At 2 p.m. that same day, her high-priced attorney, Bradford, filed for an emergency injunction. She wanted a court order to block the board meeting I had called. Her arguments: conflict of interest due to my engagement to Julian, coupled with defamation and false allegations of financial misconduct. The hearing was scheduled for November 14th. The court documents hit my desk at 4:17 p.m. I read through them, then made a single phone call to Special Agent David Chen at the EPA. November 14th, the injunction hearing, Suffolk County Superior Court. Victoria's attorney argued conflict of interest. My attorney, Sarah Mendez, the brilliant, fearless pro bono counsel for our oversight group, argued that I had properly disclosed the relationship, recused myself from any decisions favoring Julian, and held a fiduciary duty to report the irregularities. The presiding judge was Patricia Simmons, notoriously sharp and entirely intolerant of frivolous motions. Then, Agent Chen stood up. "Your Honor," he said, "the federal government objects to this injunction. Miss Jenkins's meeting involves critical evidence in an ongoing federal investigation into environmental crime and wire fraud. Blocking it would constitute an obstruction of justice. We have already subpoenaed the trust's records. This meeting must proceed." Judge Simmons looked at Victoria's lawyer as if he had just wasted a valuable portion of her life. "Mr. Bradford, your client is attempting to block a meeting that federal investigators are about to attend. Motion denied." The oral ruling took a total of 31 minutes. Outside the courthouse, I saw Julian. He had attended, sitting in the back row. We locked eyes for a brief moment. He mouthed the words, "I'm sorry." I turned away. "I'm sorry" wasn't nearly enough anymore. In the days leading up to the board meeting, something unexpected happened. Allies began to emerge. Leah was the first to call. "Whatever you need, count me in." Then Julian's uncle, Richard, requested a private meeting at the exact same cafe where Arthur had asked me to be brave. Richard looked like he had aged a decade overnight, unshaven with deep shadows under his eyes. "I've known about Victoria's operations for 3 years," he confessed, bypassing any pleasantries. "I was too weak to stop her. My father was right to choose you. If you need me, I will testify." 为什么是现在? I asked. Because looking at my nephew's face at that engagement party, I realized our entire family has spent his whole life teaching him how to be a coward. I don't want to go to my grave carrying that same cowardice. November 15th, a perfect day for a reckoning. I arrived at the office at 7 a.m. I needed time to set up. 25 chairs, 25 evidence packets, water pitchers, and spare pens. The boardroom walls were covered with photos of rescued wetlands, interspersed with 14 images of coastlines forced into neglect because funding was withheld, along with photos of displaced fishermen, including Captain Elias. I wore a simple dark gray suit. J. Crew, $240, nothing high-end. I wanted to look exactly like who I was. The scholarship girl, hair pulled back into a low bun, no makeup. I wanted Victoria to see exactly who she had underestimated. People began arriving at 9:47 a.m. Agent Chen and Emily from the U.S. Attorney's Office were the first to walk in. Then came Marcus, briefcase in hand. The board members filed in by 2s and 3s, looking incredibly tense and whispering among themselves. Keegan, the Globe reporter, sat in the back with his camera. 9:58 a.m. Victoria arrived. She deliberately showed up 3 minutes late. Her classic power play. She walked in expecting this to be her meeting, her agenda, completely under her control. Instead, she walked into a room of 25 people, federal badges, and a reporter's lens. Marcus sat at one end of the table, I sat at the other. The expression on her face shifted through a rapid sequence: shock, fury, and then a forced, rigid composure. The mask was placed back on. She looked at Marcus. What is the meaning of this? This is the meeting called by Miss Jenkins, Marcus said calmly. The procedure is entirely legal. You received the email 3 days ago. I will not participate in this farce. The bylaws dictate your attendance is mandatory, Mrs. Vance. Refusing to stay constitutes a direct breach of your fiduciary duty. She sat down stiffly at the far end of the table, as far away from me as possible. Julian walked in right behind her, 10:04 a.m. He didn't sit on her side, and he didn't sit on mine. He took a seat somewhere right in the middle. I stood up. The meeting of the board of directors for the Vance Coastal Trust is now in session, I said, my voice steady and clear. Secretary, please record the attendance. I started with the numbers. Clean, objective, and entirely devoid of emotion. Between 2020 and 2024, the Vance Trust denied 14 high-priority coastal protection projects without justification. During that exact same period, a total of $6,528,000 was diverted from the foundation into shell companies controlled by a single individual. I projected the first slide, a photograph of Arthur Vance. Victoria cut in immediately. This is defamation. I move to adjourn the meeting. I didn't even blink. The motion requires a second. Does anyone second the motion? Dead silence, absolute heavy silence. The motion fails for lack of a second. Proceeding. Exhibit A. Bank of America statements for the personal checking account of Victoria Vance. Total deposits between 2020 and 2024. $6,528,000. I projected every statement onto the screen, letting the figures speak for themselves. Exhibit B. Wyoming Shell Company registrations. The exact same registered agent for all 5 entities, all established within the year 2020, with all funds ultimately routing directly into Victoria's account. Exhibit C. Invoices for ecological strategic planning, Q3 consulting fees, and environmental advisory services. 0 supporting documentation, 0 deliverables, absolutely nothing. Because there were no environmental consultants. There was only you, Mrs. Vance, taking money meant for conservation and redirecting it for your own personal benefit. Agent Chen stood up. For the record, the EPA and the IRS have verified that these transfers constitute severe financial irregularities and wire fraud. Furthermore, there is evidence of unlawful payments made to local zoning boards to secure real estate development permits. Emily, the prosecutor, added, the U.S. Attorney's Office is currently reviewing charges. The offenses carry a potential sentence of up to 20 years. A collective gasp echoed around the table. One of the board members who had been loyal to Victoria stood straight up and walked right out of the room. He couldn't handle it. Victoria's voice was trembling. Those were legitimate consulting fees. We retained outside experts. May I see the deliverables from those experts? I asked. Because there are no experts. There is only you using a charitable fund to clear the path for your luxury resort project. Then I played Arthur's video. The image projected onto the wall. His weakened voice filled the boardroom, carrying an undeniable absolute authority. Victoria, you are destroying everything I built. The recording played her arrogant reply perfectly. You're dying anyway, a helpless invalid. This place will be entirely mine soon enough. The room fell completely silent. Several board members lowered their heads. The reporter's camera shutter clicked rapidly from the back row. The playback ended, and I looked at Victoria. Arthur Vance loved this foundation more than anything. He couldn't bear to destroy it publicly, so he asked me to save it quietly. Today, I am finishing what he started. Victoria was given the opportunity to respond. She started out aggressive, trying to deny the facts, deflect the issue, and attack my motives. This is nothing but a calculated vendetta by a jilted woman. I told her she wasn't good enough for our family, and now she— Mrs. Vance, Agent Chen interrupted, do you deny that these bank transfers occurred? We required consultants. We paid for services. What services? Can you name a single concrete deliverable? Victoria stammered. Strategic advice, planning. I don't have to explain myself to you. Her attorney, Bradford, leaned over. Mrs. Vance, stop talking right now. But she didn't stop. None of you understand what it takes to maintain a family's heritage. Sometimes sacrifices have to be made. She stopped abruptly, realizing exactly what she had just said. The prosecutor looked up, focusing his gaze entirely on her. Mrs. Vance, did you just refer to the redirection of conservation funds as a necessary sacrifice to maintain your family's heritage? Victoria slammed her hands down and stood up abruptly. "I am leaving this room." "You cannot leave until the board has concluded its vote," Marcus countered, his voice immovable. She collapsed back into her chair, her hands trembling violently as her carefully crafted composure shattered completely. I stepped forward and formally raised the motion. I move for the following actions. First, the immediate suspension of Victoria Vance from all roles within this foundation. Second, the authorization of an independent forensic audit. Third, full cooperation with the federal investigation. And fourth, the immediate review and revival of the previously denied conservation projects. All those in favor, raise your hands. Around the table, hands began to rise. Richard, Leo, Marcus, and 6 other board members, 9 hands in total. All those opposed? Victoria raised her hand, with only 2 of her remaining loyalists following suit. The motion carries 9-3. Mrs. Vance, you are officially suspended. Please surrender all Foundation credit cards, keys, and access credentials to Mr. Thorne before you exit. Victoria stood up, her chair scraping harshly against the floorboards. She grabbed her bag and marched toward the door. At the threshold, she paused and looked back at me, her eyes filled with cold resentment. She didn't say a word, but the look promised that I would regret this. I met her gaze with absolute calm. "The only thing I regret is not doing this sooner." She turned and walked out. The sharp click of her high heels faded down the stairwell until there was only silence. Keegan, the Globe reporter, raised his hand from the back. "Miss Jenkins, are you open to questions?" "Outside," I replied, "once we have concluded the remaining board business." The meeting continued for another 20 minutes to establish the audit logistics and appoint interim leadership. Richard stepped forward without hesitation. "I will step in as interim chair. I'll resign from all my for-profit corporate boards to avoid any conflict of interest. It's the absolute least I can do." Then Julian spoke. It was the first time he had opened his mouth the entire morning. He stood up, his voice strained and thick with emotion. "I want to apologize to this board, to the communities affected, and most of all to Sarah." He turned his head to look at me directly. In the exact moment I should have stood up, I chose to sit down. I will carry that regret for the rest of my life. I am resigning my seat on this board effective immediately. I don't deserve to be here. I kept my expression entirely neutral. "The board will vote on your resignation at the next scheduled meeting. For now, we still have work to do." He gave a slight solemn nod and sat back down. We officially adjourned at 11:22 a.m. The entire clearing of the ledger had taken exactly 1 hour and 22 minutes. As the board members filed out, Richard approached me privately. "Thank you for giving me the opportunity to finally do what was right. It was long overdue." Looking through the window, I could see Julian pacing outside on the pavement. Agent Chen touched my arm lightly. "We're going to need your formal testimony when the indictments are handed down. You handled that beautifully." "I just kept a promise," I told him. Outside, the media was already waiting in full force, reporters from the Boston Globe and local television affiliates. I delivered a brief, factual statement. I declined to comment on Victoria's personal matters, and when asked about Julian, I simply stated that it was a private issue. As the press crowd began to disperse, I turned to walk back into the building. Julian was standing about 10 feet away. He had heard the entire statement. Our eyes met for a brief second. I gave a slight, quiet shake of my head and stepped inside, letting the heavy doors close behind me. The media storm broke almost instantly. The Boston Globe ran the story on the front page of their evening edition. Vance Coastal Trust Chair suspended amid federal financial investigation. By noon the following day, the story had picked up national coverage across major news networks. On December 10th, at 7:18 a.m., FBI agents acting in coordination with the IRS and the EPA executed an arrest warrant at the Beacon Hill estate. Victoria was taken into custody on 12 counts of wire fraud, 3 counts of tax evasion, and 2 counts of environmental regulatory violations. The public arrival at the courthouse wasn't planned, but the press had caught wind of it. Flashes erupted everywhere as Victoria, bound in handcuffs, was escorted away from the historic home that had been maintained by a compromised legacy. Bail was set at $1 million, which Richard paid out of his personal funds, under the strict conditions that she surrender her passport and wear a GPS monitoring ankle bracelet. Julian sent me a brief text. "I know you don't want to hear from me, but thank you. You protected the people my mother would have kept harming." I read it, left it unanswered, but I didn't delete it. Richard fulfilled every single promise he made. On December 15th, he wired $6,528,000 back into the foundation account from his personal inheritance and investments, completely restoring the funds Victoria had taken. A few days later, Richard's older brother, Julian's father, issued a public apology acknowledging his years of turning a blind eye and pledged his full cooperation to the investigators. Julian disappeared from my life for 8 solid months, but in a city like Boston, if you know where to look, you still hear things. He had resigned from the Marine Institute to sever any ties to the Vance family's financial donations. Instead, he took a labor-intensive job at a local, underfunded marine mammal rescue center. He also began seeing a therapist twice a week, focusing specifically on addressing systemic family patterns and systemic accountability. He moved completely out of the family-owned condo, renting a modest 1-bedroom apartment out in Revere, paying the rent entirely with his new, smaller salary. He was building a completely different life from scratch. In February 2026, Julian's younger sister Chloe reached out and asked to grab coffee. She was still away at college and had missed the entire explosion at the engagement party. "I'm not here to ask you to forgive our family," she said honestly. "I just wanted to tell you that what you did was incredibly brave, and I'm sorry you had to carry it alone. Julian is in a completely different place now. He's really doing the work in therapy. I don't know if that matters to you, but it's real." I sat with her words for a moment before replying, "Thank you for telling me, Chloe." Victoria's trial took place in June 2026 at the U.S. District Court in Boston. It lasted 8 days. I spent 2 hours on the witness stand, systematically verifying every ledger entry, every bank transfer, and every piece of documentation. Richard testified for 45 minutes, stating clearly, "She is responsible," and by my silence, I shared in that responsibility. Captain Elias delivered a devastating victim impact statement, telling the court, "That water was our livelihood for generations. She compromised our future just to fund luxury developments." The jury deliberated for 6 hours. The verdict was guilty on all counts. The sentence was 7 years in a federal correctional facility, along with full financial restitution of the $6.5 million. In delivering the sentence, the judge stated, "You held a position of profound public trust and chose to divert resources meant to protect nature and vulnerable communities to serve your own interests. That betrayal demands full accountability." Julian sat in the gallery during the sentencing. When the marshals stepped forward to escort Victoria out, she looked back at him. He looked away. On August 20th, 2026, a hand-delivered letter was left at my office reception desk. It was written in Julian's familiar, precise handwriting. "Sarah, I know I have absolutely no right to ask for anything, but I would love to buy you a cup of coffee and just tell you what I've learned over this past year. I'm not asking for a second chance. I just want to say the words I should have said 18 months ago. If you say no, I completely understand. But if you're willing, I'll be at that cafe near Copley Square next Tuesday at 4 p.m. I'll wait for an hour. Julian." I read it 3 times. I asked myself what Arthur would have wanted me to do, and then I asked the much more important question, what did I want? On August 27th at exactly 4 p.m., I walked into the cafe. Julian was already there, sitting with an untouched, cooled cup of black coffee in front of him. When he saw me step through the door, he stood up, looking visibly nervous and uncertain. We sat down, and a brief silence settled between us. Then he spoke. "Thank you for coming. I genuinely didn't think you would. I wanted to hear what you had to say, Julian, but I need you to understand that I'm not coming into this with any expectations." "I completely understand." He took a slow, steady breath. "In the moment I should have stood up, I chose to stay seated. I chose comfort over you and over what was right. It took me a 1.5 years of intense reflection to truly understand why. I was raised to believe family loyalty meant protecting the name at all costs. You showed me that real integrity means standing up for the truth, even when it costs you everything." He looked different. He had lost weight, wore a simple pair of jeans and a plain t-shirt, and carried himself with a quiet, grounded realism. "I can't undo the choice I made that night," he said, "but I can choose how I live the rest of my life. I'm not here to beg for forgiveness. I haven't earned that yet. I just wanted you to see that I've changed. And if you're ever willing to let me prove it over time, I'll be here." I listened quietly until he finished. "Julian, I don't know if I can ever fully trust you again." "I know," he replied softly, "and I'm not asking you to make that decision today." We sat in the quiet for a few moments, the noise of the cafe humming around us. Then I spoke. Let's start with coffee, just coffee, Tuesdays at 4. We talk, we catch up, and we see. A mixture of relief and cautious hope washed over his face as he nodded. I can do that. From September through January, that was our routine. 5 months of Tuesday afternoons. We talked about his work at the rescue center, my conservation initiatives, his progress in therapy, and we talked about Arthur. Slowly, carefully, a sense of honest communication began to rebuild. On January 20th, 2027, instead of sitting in the cafe, we went for a walk along the Boston Harbor, right near the area where we had first met at the beach cleanup years ago. We walked in a comfortable silence for a while before Julian turned to me. If I keep showing up, if I spend the next few years genuinely proving that I am someone who stands up, is there a chance for us down the road? I didn't answer right away. I thought about Arthur, about my mother, and about Captain Elias. I thought about what was worth fighting for and what was worth carefully rebuilding. Julian, I said finally, stopping to face him. I don't need you to be perfect. I need you to be brave. I need to know that if we ever find ourselves in a situation like that engagement party again, where choosing what is right means losing status, comfort, or approval, that you will stand up. Can you promise me that? He stopped, looking directly into my eyes with absolute sincerity. I promise. I will spend the rest of my life proving it to you. Then let's keep having our Tuesday coffees, I said with a slight smile, and we'll see what the future holds. We didn't kiss and we didn't hold hands, but we walked back side by side. And for now, that was exactly enough. By February 2027, the foundation office looked completely transformed. The boardroom walls were now lined with vibrant photos of fully restored wetlands and thriving fishing docks. That evening, Julian had stayed late to volunteer, helping me archive new environmental data. We stood together looking at the display. Arthur would be incredibly proud of you, he murmured. You finished what he couldn't. We did it, I corrected gently, looking over at him. You're here too, even if you had to earn your way back brick by brick. Right in the center of the display wall, we had mounted a brand new polished brass plaque. Arthur Vance, 1938 to 2025. Founder. His legacy endures. We stood in front of it together. Real redemption isn't about achieving perfection or erasing the choices of the past. It's about showing up every single day, doing the heavy lifting, and earning back trust through consistent action. A lasting bond isn't built on a flawless history. It's built on the slow, deliberate work of honesty and accountability. Julian is still doing that work every day. Perhaps one day, that will be enough. But for now, we have our Tuesday coffees. And a wall of photographs to remind us exactly why standing up for integrity matters more than staying comfortable. Arthur understood that truth. And now, finally, so do we.